I'm gonna blow it. Ready?
All right.
Is it gonna be loud?
Hello everybody, Barbenheimer is upon us. It's a huge double feature movie event. So I'll do a quick rundown for people who somehow didn't get the memo. So there are two highly anticipated movies this year, one being Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer, the other being Greta Gerwig's Barbie movie starring Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling. And they were both set to release on the same day, and that was a big deal, and everyone was planning this double feature. And I think it's because of the contrast between the tones of the two films. One is this dreary film about the nuclear bomb being created, and the other is like a Barbie movie. It's an upbeat pink comedy and then this dark, serious period piece. So it's been a huge deal, not just in the film community, but pop culture-wise in general. And I'm really happy about this because it is truly a big movie event, and we don't get these things that often anymore. It's getting everyone excited for a theatre-going experience, and it's one of the biggest movie events of the year, and it has nothing to do with any Marvel films. So it's all a big, happy, nice thing there, but now it's time for the nasty British film reviewer, the nasty, cynical man, to criticise these films and ruin the fun for everyone. So I saw both of these films the same day. I don't think I've ever done that before. Oppenheimer, then Barbie. Oppenheimer was 3 hours, Barbie was like 2 hours. One after the other, essentially as soon as Oppenheimer ended, the Barbie screening began. So I will review Oppenheimer first, and I think I loved Oppenheimer. I definitely really liked it. I think it might be one of Christopher Nolan's best. For me, Christopher Nolan is a very iconic filmmaker, but he hasn't quite mastered his style yet. He hasn't made a masterpiece. I love films like The Dark Knight, I love films like Inception, but they are definitely rough around the edges. Memento might be his most streamlined film, but because of the ever-growing scale of his films and his status in Hollywood, he does invite the comparison to a Spielberg or a Kubrick. And for me, he hasn't really reached that level of prestige yet.
Do you get it? Because it's the prestige.
Tenet and Dunkirk were deeply flawed movies. I still liked them. I still thought they had a lot of good aspects to them, but still quite flawed. Oppenheimer, however, now it might be a little early to say, but this could be the closest thing he's ever made to a masterpiece. On an editing level, on a pacing level, on a script writing level, this is the tightest film he has made on this scale of production. As we've come to expect, he does play around with time a lot in this film, but it all works very cohesively and it never gets convoluted or disorientating. In fact, this film embodies an editing style that usually I'd find very off-putting and hackneyed. It does not take away from the emotional impact of any of the scenes. It isn't choppy and rushed. That's usually my complaint when something is over-edited. It cuts out all of the meat of the story. This was a fast-paced masterpiece. It played like a beautiful, chaotic symphony, and I'm so glad that he managed to pull it off. It's risky. It's so frenetic. There are so many quick cuts and time jumps, but it all manages to flow so smoothly. It reminded me a lot of The Social Network, which also has a very tight script and jumps around to all of these different periods in time, but tells such a masterfully streamlined story. I should also note that the screenplay of this film is meticulously crafted. Again, it's heavy on the information, it throws so much exposition at you, but you never get confused, you're always enjoying it, you're always taking it in just about. It's a lot to take in, but it's still very engaging, and it's this brilliant 3-hour installment of amazing script writing, brilliant editing and pacing and storytelling. It honestly plays like one of those classic court case dramas that goes on for over 2 hours, but you're always engaged throughout. And that's what's really surprised me with this film, is that I've never been so impressed with Christopher Nolan from a script point of view. And it was just so delightful to get that new experience from this director that I've kind of grown up with. And also I have just come to expect the same kind of tedious flaws from him, but they weren't present in this film. Or at least if they were well utilised. Dunkirk played around with time, but almost in a gimmicky, ridiculous way where it just needlessly confused the viewer. In this, the time jumps feel very necessary and it's quite artistically done. Again, too early to tell, but as of right now, I really love that film. Like all Christopher Nolan films, it does get a little bit cheesy at times, some fairly Hollywoody lines. This is the most important fucking thing in the history of the universe and shit, when Matt Damon says that. That's like the Oscar bait kind of line, the Ron Howard line. I don't think Christopher Nolan realises how Hollywoody his films can be in certain areas, ideas. I actually really like Inception because of those reasons, because it's this conventional Hollywood film. Regardless of whether or not that was his intention with it, I don't know if he was trying to make something avant-garde and weird and stoic, but for me, it's just a goofy movie. When these moments did emerge in this film, and they were few and far between, because most of the dialogue is excellently written, honestly, I was already on board with the film, and I kind of just enjoyed the cheese at that point. For whatever reason, I wasn't annoyed at the sight of Matt Damon in this, so fair enough. It's a little bit like the late Spielberg films like Saving Private Ryan and Schindler's List, like very serious topics, but they do have a little bit of Hollywood cheese in there, but you excuse it because the film in and of itself is just really good. My biggest complaint with the film is it doesn't utilise its R rating, at least in a gore sense. I mean, I have to assume it's rated R at this point. You see full frontal nudity, you see Florence Pugh's boobs. I don't think I've ever seen a Christopher Nolan sex scene before. That was very interesting. But in the gore department, this film fell heavily short. And I'm not just saying that because of like edgelord reasons, like, oh, it needs to be more fucked up and horrible. To get across the horrific nature of this thing they have created, this weapon, they should have showcased the full horrific extent of the damage it causes. However, because this film gave me all of these other things to chew on, and again, it is about Oppenheimer's life, so after the nuke is created, it kind of goes in a different direction. It's not a war film, it's an Oppenheimer biopic, so it's not all about the bomb per se. This brings me on to Cillian Murphy's performance, which was excellent, one of his very best acting roles. There are obviously a lot of huge stars in this, there were no weak performances. I really like the old age makeup in this, because again, it plays around a lot with time, and I thought that was very convincingly done. I also really did enjoy Robert Downey Jr.'s performance in this. Like, I thought he was very good and captivating, but it was also a fairly Oscar baity performance at times. Like, you could tell, like, this is the moment when he's like shouting, it's a close-up on his face, this is the moment they're going to show at the Oscars. It's hard to describe, but it's almost as if you see someone acting rather than the character at times. But it's still weirdly captivating because he's putting his all into it. Now, I don't think this is a spoiler, but yeah, bombs do go off in this film, and in particular, there's one scene which is littered with nail-biting tension in anticipation to this thing being detonated, and that was like a masterfully done scene. And I'm just overall really happy that I went to the cinema, watched a 3-hour epic big budget movie, and got such a visceral experience from it. Not to be like, oh, back in my day, but that really did feel like a classic big boy movie. I came out the theatre buzzing, and then I met up with some friends because we were all going to watch Barbie right after, and I really just wanted to fucking just go on about it, but I couldn't because they hadn't seen it. But I was just ecstatic with that. You know, when you've just seen a good film and all the endorphins are going off, you know, all your dopamine's going off. It's lovely, lovely experience. One last final thing I want to mention about Oppenheimer is like one particular creative choice in the movie, because I know reviews are supposed to be like an overview of the whole thing, but sometimes I really just like to pick out individual moments, like, oh yes, juicy bit of cinema. There's a scene where Cillian Murphy, Oppenheimer, is getting sort of trialed or interrogated by people, and at one point he's forced to talk about this sexual encounter he has with Florence Pugh, who he slept with whilst he was married to Emily Blunt. And Emily Blunt is like sat on a sofa in the corner behind Cillian Murphy as all this is going on, and it kind of cuts to her and her perspective when this topic is brought up, and she already knows about this cheating incident anyway, but it's just the fact that it's being brought up in such a public manner, and it's quite embarrassing and humiliating. And to illustrate all of these emotions, they have a naked Florence Pugh appear on the lap of Cillian Murphy, who now is also naked all of a sudden, and they're making love right there and then, and it really hammers home this point of it being this undignified undressing of Cillian Murphy's character, a literal and metaphorical undressing of his character and their marriage. And it was only a little moment, but I really liked it. I've never seen that kind of artistry from Christopher Nolan before. It was very experimental and surrealist. Anywho, that's enough about that. Now it's time to do Barbie, baby. Barbie! So I just seen the best film ever made, a great dad movie, old Oppenheimer is, a great man's film, yeah, have a steak afterwards. And then I went into Barbie, it's for girls, yucky yucky, I hate women. Now Greta Gerwig made Barbie, she was the writer, director behind Lady Bird and Little Women, those are the two films that I've seen of hers. I like both of those films, I like them for their human characters and also their feminist themes, all of the social commentary, all that. I know I'm a big sexist, but I actually like the feminist themes in those films because it is possible for me to do that when it's just well done. So going into this film, I was actually highly optimistic, and maybe I had my expectations set a little too high, but here goes. Unfortunately, I found myself to be quite disappointed by this new Barbie film. It proved to be quite broad and predictable in its presentation and narrative. I actually liken it to a Pixar film where it's this fun concept at the start, but then it wears thin and devolves into this bog standard plot about fish out of water comedy and all that. This same thing goes with a comedy as well, which is also like funny at the start, nice and charming, but it soon just gets a little old. It's a very familiar blend of comedy, this Will Ferrell, Judd Apatow, Adam McKay-esque humour. And because there are a lot of jokes in this film, some of them did tickle me, some of them did get to me, like, hey, whoa, whoa. But ultimately, I was disappointed in how non-specific and generic this comedy was. And this is quite a long film as well. I thought it'd be 90 minutes, but apparently not. It probably should have been that length. But because of that length, after a while, maybe an hour or so into the film, I was really bored of this gimmick. It gets monotonous, it gets repetitive and one note, there's not much to chew on. And yeah, I was just sat there in the cinema and I was a bit restless and I was like, oh, come on, come on, come on! Oppenheimer was good though, Oppenheimer was sick! The theatre was full of 13-year-old girls dressed in pink and they were all absolutely loving it. And I was happy on their behalf. I was kind of laughing for them sometimes. Like, yeah, that is quite funny if I was like, had the mindset of you. But it is long, it is repetitive, and the novelty wears off fairly quickly. And I was just in the cinema like, oh. If you told me like Paul Feig directed this film, that would not surprise me. And there's also another aspect to this film, and this is what's going to get me in hot water, and that being the social commentary in this film. The hallmark feminist themes of Greta Gerwig's movies are back. Now, I really wish I didn't have to do this, because the kind of subjects that this film brings up forces me to have to address them in a particular way that is congruent to my opinion on the matter, and it makes me out to be almost a villain, and I don't want to even talk about these controversial issues anyway, but I have to speak the truth. Now, this has got me some of the most heavy-handed and simplistic social commentary I've seen all year. At times, it was alright, fairly nuanced, fairly balanced, but a lot of the time, it reminded me of that Gillette ad, that infamous Gillette ad, which is like men bad. I don't like using those terms in reviews like haha men bad, haha this bad, but this is how simplistic it came across to me, this film. Again, more like a Paul Feig or an Adam McKay film than a Greta Gerwig movie, because it's so buzzwordy in how it depicts certain things. It's critiquing the patriarchy, which is a fine thing to do, but it's just so shallowly, immaturely done. I'm gonna have to say it, but the patriarchy isn't an inherently bad thing, it's just something that can go wrong when not used well. Like anything, like religion, like the matriarchy as well. And also, when it comes to the male-female hierarchy in society, things really aren't as imbalanced as this film seems to point out. This film essentially has two worlds, there's Barbie world and real world, and what it does is it plays these two in contrast. In the Barbie world, all of the females have these positions of power and influence, where they're the president, they're the astronauts, all of these big jobs. The construction workers, they're amazing athletes, all that jazz. Then it goes over to the real world, and I say that in quotation marks, and in that world it does the complete opposite, and it says this is where the men have this obscene amount of power. But the whole point is it's saying that this is the real world, this is unfortunately how it actually works, like men have all the power and it's obscene, but it's just the way things are. Now, this real world depicted in the film could just be a microcosm, like an exaggerated version of our world, fair enough, but it is also supposed to function as the reality that we know, so it's contrasted with this fictitious Barbie world. The funny thing is, this real world that is depicted is pretty much just as fantastical as the Barbie world in the film, because it's quite unrealistic. I'm sure that's how an angsty female feminist would view the world, but that would just be down to a lack of maturity and essentially surface level nihilism, because you kind of have to be a crazy nihilist to believe this shit. It's almost like a Pandora's box story, where by going into this real world she's opened the box and all this terrible shit is unleashed, all the terrible shit about reality. Depression, decay, lust, all of that stuff. And it's an interesting concept, like I will admit, but that kind of cynical depiction of this male-dominated world was just way too heavy-handed for me and a little surface level. This might be down to the fact that I am currently making my way through the entirety of the show Mad Men, which also handles these same kind of themes and ideas, but that is done in such a grounded and realistic, nuanced way, and maybe I've just been spoilt with that kind of storytelling. Barbie is perhaps supposed to be the more metaphorical and overt way of doing things, but I do like myself some balance, some middle ground. If Mad Men was just men bad, I wouldn't watch it. I know this is Barbie, this is about the female perspective in life, but it does include the prominent character of Ken, and it does have the male experience contrasted with the female experience. And the male representation is far less developed and three-dimensional. Like, we've got a lot of shit going on as well, there's a lot of terrible things that happen to men, but that's kind of swept under the rug. There's this kind of strange warped lie going around that women are inherently worse off than men, which is just horribly untrue. And for these very rigid and pointed views to come from a film that's directed by Greta Gerwig is quite bizarre. I expected a far more delicate approach from her, and we didn't get that. It tries to sort of acknowledge the male side of things at the end, but it's too little too late. It's like, oh yeah, men also have problems as well. Oh men are human as well, but it's kind of like, it's a bit too late for that, I'm afraid. Now you might say I'm biased to the male side of things, but actually that's false, because I'm actually part of this alien race that's all gender neutral, and we're these higher beings that have just far more intellectual capability and thinking than all of you stupid humans.
No, I won't let you do just one appendectomy.
But I'm a man.
But not a doctor.
Can I talk to a doctor?
You are talking to a doctor.
I hope I've been nuanced about my complaints towards the social commentary of this film. I'm not trying to be like woke bad, I'm not trying to be like the critical drinker or anything. It's just messaging that's too simplistic and rigid for me. But trust me, I'm like fucking Jesus. I'm a hero, man, because I have to like, I'm in the middle. I'm like true neutral politically. Like, I'm not left, I'm not right, and both of them think I'm like the other extreme. The left wingers think I'm a right wing extremist, the right wingers think I'm a liberal cuck. It's just, I get the brunt of both fucking ends, and it's horrible, and I'm just in the middle of it, like, ah! So that's that anyway. We've reviewed 2 films, and I would highly recommend you prioritise Oppenheimer over the mid Barbie film. Mid, woke garbage, crap, and yucky. Oppenheimer was directed by a man, Barbie was directed by a woman, and look how things turned out. And that's exactly why I prefer Oppenheimer. Maybe women should just shut the fuck up. And remember to fucking subscribe. No.